Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Eddie Liger Power Hour. I am joined today by my brother from another mother, Carlos El Garrido, the philosopher extraordinaire. Just got back from China. Looked like a very fun trip. I was highly jealous as I edited here in the decaying empire that we call the United States while I watched Carlos in China and edited videos for him here. We're going to be talking about that a little bit today, talking to Carlos about his trip to China, what he saw, what it was like, if he feels like he's the Cuban I Show Speed, all that good stuff. And we'll also be talking about Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso, and the anti-imperialist movement in Africa, which is extremely exciting for everybody who's been paying attention. So we'll get into all these exciting topics right after the intro.
High Sheriff Hazard is a hard man to be. High Sheriff is his only plan. He digs through pockets, takes what he can, for he's High Sheriff Hazard. He caught me one evening, and here's what he said: "You look like a Russian, you look like a red, and if you're fond of your skin and your head, beware the High Sheriff of Hazard."
All right, farewell, Sheriff Hazard. So, Carlos, how was the trip to China? It looked very cool. You got to visit a tea producing sort of collective farm there in the rural regions and a bunch of other cool stuff. So, yeah, what was your impression in general?
Well, it was excellent. One of the things that I didn't want to do when I got to China was just presume that everything that I thought was true going into it from my readings and, just what I've seen in social media and been able to share. I didn't want my understanding of what China was like to sort of contaminate my real experience. I wanted, in a very Chinese fashion, to actually seek truths from facts and try to be as disconnected of an observer as I possibly could. And one of the things that I was struck with, literally within the first 15 minutes of being in China, on the car ride to my hotel in Beijing, was that at nighttime there were multiple women walking the streets alone. And, perhaps some of you in Europe or in other parts of the world, this might not be that very meaningful of a fact for you. But for us in the US, I mean, most people understand that girls grow up getting told by their mothers and fathers that walking at night alone as a woman is not something that you do. It's very unsafe for women in the US. And the fact that I saw it in one car ride, I saw like 3 women walking alone at different points, and they looked perfectly safe. You know, they weren't looking over their shoulder, concerned. That was something that struck me. And as I spent more time in China, I spent a total of 5 days. Um, Even myself, as a foreigner in cities that were not the most cosmopolitan, where I was the only one that looked like I didn't belong. I was still walking the streets for 4 or 5 hours at nighttime. I got lost a few times, and there was not one moment that I didn't feel safe. And in the US, where I've grown up, you know, where I speak the language, where in many cases I know the cities quite well, you know, even as a man, you know, and a man of some stature, as I like to consider myself, you still feel a little bit unsafe. You still look over your shoulder if you're walking at night. And that safety that I experienced in China, that is central, I think, to the well-being of a people. Because look, if you have economic security, but you're scared to get robbed, or perhaps worse, when you walk out into the street at night, you know, your well-being is not that well. But that sense of security, I think, was one of the things that struck me the most, and it struck me very quickly. There's of course a lot of development. I didn't spend a lot of time in Beijing. I was able to drive through downtown as I headed to the airport, and I mean, the buildings are just marvelous. You look at the streets, extremely clean. There's cleaning crews all throughout the day, literally picking up trash in a very ACP style from the street. And I got to drive past Tiananmen Square. I didn't go in. I heard that the line to go in is just tremendous because of how many people are going to China and visiting these historic sites. But it was perhaps the biggest building I think I've ever seen in my whole life. It was absolutely mammoth of a building. And that's something that you get a sense of as soon as you get off in the airport. Like, they're making things to basically show off what humanity can do. And that's something that's something that you're afforded when you have an economy that's based on meeting people's needs, on growing in a way that's meaningful and connected to actual, you know, human drives, and not just this abstract notion of profit and this accumulation of numbers in a bankster's laptop or computer. So there was a sense in the airports, in the city centers, of almost like a Promethean showing off of what humanity is able to do. And it was quite literally breathtaking. You know, some of this was sublime in the Kantian sense. Kant used to say that the sublime was that which, you know, the impression of it can give you simultaneously joy and almost like a sense of fear and melancholy. You know, you feel very tiny when you're in the face of these great creations of humanity, but you also feel a great sense of joy because you kind of recognize yourself in that, in the fact that it was humanity who did it. So um, I'll leave it there. There's a lot more observations that I had, especially in the tea farm that I went to, a tea commune in Enshi, one of the poorest, if not the poorest, I think, part of central China. But I want to give you an opportunity to sort of bounce back some of the ideas that I tossed out there.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, because we've had these ideas about China for so long that have just come from studying the country and comparing their system to that which we have in the United States. And you know, it's interesting because we always try to be non-dogmatic, and we try to not be, you know, dig our heels in order to continue agreeing with our preconceived conclusions in the face of contrary evidence. So like Carlos said, we always try to be as open-minded as possible, as open to new facts as possible, and as non-dogmatic as possible, which is something that, you know, a lot of the Chinese intellectuals that we like are very good at, that they exemplify in their work. But to have Carlos actually go visit and actually have all of our preconceived conclusions confirmed by the things that he saw was quite interesting, quite amazing. And I mean, it's not just that, but like I Show Speed, this big streamer going to China, and again confirming everything that we thought was true about China. It's just what we thought it was the superiority of socialism and the socialist economic system being shown in practice. And the more we study it and the closer we get to it, the more we realize that's correct. It is, unbelievable development and incredible advancement of, human life expectancy, human production, everything that is human is being advanced faster in China than it is here in the United States. And people know I'm a big fan of American cities. I've been to almost every American city, which means I've been to almost every American airport. So hearing what Carlos said about the airports was just so interesting, because every airport is like it's like a symbol of the city that the airport is situated in. Like when you get off the plane in Las Vegas, Nevada, the first thing that you're going to see is casinos. You're going to see slot machines all lit up and stuff, which is the same thing that you see in the city. So to hear that, not even in China, but in like South Korea and these
Yeah.
other, capitalist countries where they have more central economic planning, that they had these beautiful airports was pretty interesting. But I think one of the most interesting things that Carlos told me about the collective farming system was what you heard from a private farm owner in China. So Carlos is checking out the tea production at one of these collective farms, which is basically like a commune. But then he got a chance to talk with somebody who was a manager or involved with one of the private farms there, one of the more capitalistic farms. And I thought that was one of the more interesting stories that you brought back.
I can go through it. It was also very interesting to me. I on the second day, I spent most of the day doing media work. I did an interview with a very prominent Chinese media platform, hopefully out soon. I don't want to say too much about it, but one of the things I realized in that interview before I get to the tea story was, look, China's not perfect, and none of us are saying that. It might seem like that coming from the U.S. and dealing with all of the limitations that we recognize as unnecessary as products of the system that we have in the U.S. But there's this interesting phenomenon in the youth in China where they're kind of struggling to find like a meaning or purpose in life. A lot of them feel somewhat alienated, and I look at all the things they have guaranteed. I look at their living standard, and it kind of just feels like, some of them are unable to recognize all of the things that the revolution has won. That's something that I know has happened in Cuba as well, where younger generations have somewhat of a tendency to forget, what has been won, how have things changed. So that's a problem problem of consciousness that I know that the party's dealing with, especially in the youth, to sort of reanimate that revolutionary spirit. Um, and that came out in the interview questions that I was asked, because they were searching for homologies, similarities between like American youth and what the American young people are going through and Chinese youth. And I was like, well, I don't think the situation is the same, guys. American youth are drowning in debt. They have literally no prospects for a life. If they become professionals, their prospects are even worse because, and not only do they not find a job, but they have $100,000 in debt that they have to pay for, like myself, for the crime of getting educated. That's not stuff you're dealing with in China, but it's almost like there used to be these sociological studies in the US in the middle of the last century, when we actually had prosperity and we had security. And there was this phenomenon that sociologists described where once material comforts were secured for people, then they started, trying to look for new ways to find spiritual discomforts to fight about. And that's something that I think is happening to the youth. They're living so comfortably that they have to find something to be discontented about. So it's not a perfect society, but coming from the U.S., it seems pretty darn near perfect. The tea farm I went to on the second day after, you know, after 18 hours on planes, uh, my friends thought it was wise to also put me on 6 more hours of planes. first from Beijing to Wuhan, and then from Wuhan to Enxie, which is a part of the Hubei province. And I was told there, some of the plans that I had changed last minute. I was told that this place that I was going to was the poorest city in central China. So in my head, perhaps in a somewhat like Eurocentric mindset, I was expecting like dirt roads and people wearing straw hats and the traditional picture of like an extremely poor Chinese city that we get in the West. And as soon as I got there, I was like, all right, guys, when is this dirt poor city that you're talking about? When are we going to get there? Because I swear to God, I wish I was lying about this, but that city, Enshi, was a lot nicer than the vast majority of the biggest cities in America. It was extremely clean, and it was able to combine both like extremely modern architecture and like these massive skyscrapers and lights on the buildings. Like, just think Miami, that sort of technological advancement in terms of buildings, but with also traditional architecture. So I was walking by, and you have these like traditional Chinese buildings, extremely colorful with blue and tiles and pictures and images and dragons all over the place. And it was able to provide like a real synthesis. It was almost like dialectical architecture where they're consciously incorporating the best of the old with the best of the new. And my jaw was dropped, because it was beautiful, and I was not expecting that at all. Then I was taken to the countryside of that city, which was where the communes and the tea farms were. And my jaw was dropped once again, because I thought, well, okay, well, the city is nice. Maybe the countryside is where I see the dirt roads and all the poverty. And I got there and I didn't see any of that. I saw like heavenly scenic sites that were absolutely gorgeous in the middle of the mountains. I saw people that just 7 years ago was living in absolute poverty, but because of the poverty alleviation programs, they were uplifted out of that. The roads that we're walking on were paved just 2-3 years prior. The buildings where they slept in, the members of the commune and others, members of the private farms, those buildings were recently created. And in these buildings, you also had that synthesis of traditional Chinese with modern architecture. And I got to talk to these people, and they absolutely love the Communist Party. They absolutely love the trajectory of China. Because think about it, these are people that actually lived in those horrendously decrepit conditions that appear in our minds when we think about the words poorest city in China, and that now are living in conditions that if American farmers went to these countrysides in China, we would have a revolution in a year. It's that simple, because what they've been able to be afforded by the state is incredible. I went to the sites of tea productions where they dry them, where they do all these different processes to the tea in order to make it edible. All of the machines provided by the state. They had a little sticker that said, provided by the state. Everything was provided by the state. So, of course, it was thriving. And what they end up doing in order to promote the countryside is that the major cities that are around the smaller ones, they have quotas for how much they have to buy from the countryside so that they can stimulate the economic life and the exports of the countryside. So in general, I saw an extremely prosperous society. And in the private farm, I found this very interesting phenomenon where this farm had been around since the 1970s with the Cultural Revolution. At some point, it gets bought by a private individual, capitalist, and he hires a Chinese individual that had studied marketing in, I believe it was North Dakota or something. They started marketing in the States. And I was talking to this woman, which has since become a good friend of mine. And she was telling me all of these contradictions that she's encountering because the model is like the private for-profit model. And in her mind, the logical conclusion to all of those contradictions was like the commune. And besides, it wasn't just a logical. She's looking around at these other communes where there's like 6 families working collectively, and they don't have those problems. So this person that was like a Western-facing Chinese individual from a richer city in China, studied in the U.S., just by seeing the contradictions firsthand, she goes from like that westernized mindset to Mao. She was telling me how she wakes up every morning, she reads Mao, she was quoting Mao to me, and it was insane. So I mean, the amount of experiences that I had were infinitely memorable, but I think these were some of the most memorable ones. I also got to go to a Maoist store. I'm going to be uploading a short video on it, hopefully within the next few days. I was able to buy some technically illegal uh, uh, pieces of merchandise and propaganda from the Cultural Revolution, and it was pretty dope to see the political spectrum in China, from like the left wing, extremely pro Cultural Revolution people that are supportive but critically supportive of the government, to the right wing, which are just like extremely pro government. They consider there's like no exploitation at all in China yet. And then like the centrists that are like a mixture of both. So it made me wish that was the political spectrum that we had to work with here in the States.
Yeah, it's like the opposite of the political spectrum in Israel, where the people on the left are like still pro-apartheid, still pro-Israel, which is this U.S. puppet state, but they're critical of Netanyahu and the genocide. China's like the opposite. The right-wingers are like far more left-wing than the average person in America. But I just thought that story was interesting because it's like a microcosm of what we're seeing. Like it's even a microcosm of like the I Show Speed vlogs in China, where there's all this effort in America now to crack down on freaking vloggers, daily vloggers from the DPRK and from China. Because if you just see what these societies are like, if you see the kind of system that they actually have, it debunks all of the propaganda that you've been told about them. And, you know, even there you have somebody who's working on one of the more private capitalistic farms in China, who recognizes that the more socialist communist farms are superior in all these various different ways. So I thought that was an interesting story. It was super cool to hear, all the stories that Carlos brought back, to see the videos of him at the Maoist store there. Like super cool. It vindicated me a little bit. I've always been pretty pro Cultural Revolution, and I know the Chinese government today is not, but that's one of the few areas of disagreement I have with them. But they kind of had to go that direction because the conditions and whatnot. But got a couple super chats here. Thank you, Michelle. Carlos, did you drink any tea with the locals?
I did. They're like hugely into tea. Everywhere they give you tea. At the Maoist store, the guy was giving us tea. Not a big fan of tea, but I'll rock with it. I'll rock with the cultural difference. As a Cuban, we drink little shots of espresso with a very sugary foam at the top, such that our coffee it's almost like sugar with coffee and not coffee with sugar. But the tea was fine. The warm water wasn't the biggest fan, but it is what it is. It's healthier, I was told. I got to drink moonshine with these communards, I guess, and I got to break bread with them. I did a video on that. That's up on my Instagram and on the Institute's Instagram, and I think on our Twitter as well. It was tremendous. It was a very interesting experience because the man that was giving me the moonshine, this was like a very ancient recipe that was handed down to him by his family, and he was very proud of the moonshine, and he would have been very offended had I not drank it. And I could tell he was kind of disappointed that I stopped at one, but I had work to do later that day, so I didn't want to have too much fun. But I had one shot of his moonshine and one like basically a 40 of Chinese beer with them, and we broke bread. I got really good at eating with chopsticks. I was able to pick up little nuts and stuff by the end of my trip with chopsticks. So it was a good experience. The people, once you get to know them, they're very warm. And it was overall great. I came away thinking, something that Deng Xiaoping actually suggested at some point, which is we need to find a way to make the reality of the superiority of socialism evident to whoever goes to a socialist country. And by the time I left, I realized all of the dogmatisms and presumptions about socialism and communism that we have in the U.S. would be utterly smashed if Americans actually took the time to travel and go to China and see what it is. And right now you can go without a visa and stay for up to 2 weeks. So you can just buy a ticket, which is a little bit expensive, but not that expensive. Once you're in China, everything's affordable. And you can travel freely for up to 2 weeks and not be, asked for a visa or anything. So I definitely recommend it to all who go and share the truth, because they're literally trying to get us to go to war with China for no fucking reason. The Chinese are not, in terms of foreign policy, they're not the Soviets. They're not trying to antagonize America. They're trying to develop win-win relations with everyone, and that includes the U.S. as well. So besides just sheer imperial arrogance, there's really no need to be antagonistic with China. In fact, we have a lot to learn from what China has done in such a short time, starting at such a low level of poverty. If we did even a fraction of what China has done, our society would be extremely prosperous.
Yeah, they're not the Soviets yet. We'll see how far America pushes them, but yeah, very interesting. Battle Cossack here with the 500 Argentinian bucks. Thank you, Battle Cossack. Traore of Burkina Faso better start developing nukes. Jackson Hinkle would like that. If he doesn't want to get removed by the National Endowment for Democracy and the Central Intelligence Agency color revolution apparatus. That was Gaddafi's mistake, to trust the U.S. that if he gave up on his nuclear program, they would leave Libya alone. True, that was one of the mistakes that Gaddafi made. That was one of, Sankara didn't give up. Burkina Faso didn't have a nuclear program at the time, but he was too trusting. There were people in Sankara's administration who were warning him that there were members in his administration who were selling out to the Western imperialists, including his best friend, Blaise Compaoré. But Sankara chose to trust his best friend, and that ended up being the person who led the effort to kill him, cut him up into a bunch of little pieces so nobody could find his body, bury him around Burkina Faso, and then his best friend, that scumbag, how big of a piece of shit is Blaise Compaoré? That would be like if the ACP took power and I turned around and killed Carlos on behalf of Wall Street shareholders in order to put them back in power. What a scumfuck. But anyways, it seems like Ibrahim Traore, who was born a year after Thomas Sankara was overthrown, who seems to have learned a lot from Sankara, has indeed learned from the mistakes of past socialist leaders. Now, that doesn't mean he's invulnerable. He's still battling all these imperialist apparatuses that Battle Cossack mentions here. But there have already been efforts to overthrow him from within his administration. He's faced over 10 assassination attempts already. He's had to arrest members from within his own administration. And of course, this comes with accusations of being a dictator or whatever. But this is what needs to be done if you want to combat imperialism. You have to be a little bit paranoid. You have to be on the lookout. Because the imperialists will be looking to bribe anyone in your administration or pay off anybody they can to kill you and overthrow you. So it seems like Traore understands this. And it seems like he also has not only a loyal group of people around him, but the Mali and the other Sahel states seem to be getting on board with his agenda. He's the leader, but it seems like a lot of these other African states are jumping on board, kicking out the Western imperialists, joining in his calls for a more united Africa. So this could be the start of something huge. But of course, that means the imperialists for the next couple of years or so are going to put so much effort into killing Ibrahim Traore. So we need to protect this man at all costs, as I've been saying on my social media repeatedly here.
Yeah, and I just recently saw an interview that George Galloway did with Joseph Okechukwu, an African individual who was talking about the meaning of Traore. And it was after I saw that interview that I put out the tweet about Traore being Africa's Che Guevara. Because this kid represents, first of all, there's an aesthetic component to world historic leaders that cannot be ignored. And it's an objective fact that this kid is swagged out. This individual is objectively someone with aura, someone who is cool, and who even politically neutral individuals can look at and see someone to admire in his presence. Fidel Castro was someone that was like that. If you speak to even the haters that got to see Fidel in person, staggering 6'2", 6'3" figure with, just a presence to him that attracted people, a central force that brought people to him. And those are qualities that Traore has. Those are qualities that Che Guevara had. In conjunction to that, he's got a very similar vision to Africa as Che had for the Americas. Che for the Americas was Bolivarian through and through, a student of Martí, a student of all the great Pan-American thinkers that understood that the only way you can beat U.S. imperialism is by uniting all of these nations that have been fractured, but that are a part of essentially the same civilizational project. They have the same basic components mixed in to create the national realities that exist. Only a united America could defeat the giant of the seven leagues, as Martí called it. And the same principle is operative in Traore's thought. It was operative in Cabral, in Sankara, in all the great leaders of Africa, in Lumumba. And the principle is the one that comes from Nkrumah, that if imperialism divides, right, which is what imperialism has to do, which is it's this interesting dialectic, because as Eric Hobsbawm shows us in a study of the origins of nations, capitalism creates the notion of a nation. It's a new notion historically. It's tied to capitalism's need to bring people together. But then at a certain point, it needs to find new ways, instead of to unite people, to divide them. So that's what you have with Africa. You have the complete partition, what's the word, where the breaking apart, that there's people that are trying to do it to the U.S.
Balkanize.
The balkanization, right? The balkanization of Africa. And Nkrumah's answer is simple to that. We need to unite if we actually want to defeat colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. And Traore understands that very, very well. The unity that he's been able to form with the leaders of the Niger progressive coup, with Mali, and with other parts of Africa are extremely inspiring. And as long as that principle of Pan-Africanism, of a united Africa as a collective civilizational project against capitalist imperialism, against those countries that have built their wealth on the pillaging of Africa, insofar as that principle stays in mind, he's going to continue doing what he's doing now, which is inspiring people not just in the Sahel region, but all over Africa, that are looking at their sham of leaders, that are looking at this comprador class that dominates and oppresses their people, and that keeps them without any real sovereignty, and saying, no, this isn't the only destiny that Africa can have. There could be a new Africa that is prosperous, that is doing what the folks over there in Burkina Faso are doing. So I wouldn't be surprised if even just Traore's persona is able to inspire greater revolutionary movements across the continent. And as soon as those happen and they unite and have the backing of Russia and China, as they have, this could be a new world. As soon as Africa rises up, capitalism is done. It's that
game
simple.
over. No, exactly. And I imagine he will. Like you said, this man has the swagger of a Che Guevara. He's inspiring people all across the continent. He's inspiring people all across the world. I keep seeing videos in America, of Americans inspired by Traore and what he's doing. And now you see the other Sahel states sort of jumping on board. And if there's anything that the American ruling class fears more than an American communist uprising, it's Pan-Africanism, because capitalism has only been able to survive for this long by, just pillaging Africa and bringing all of their resources back to the West. As soon as Africa becomes independent, nationalizes their resources, unifies, it's game over. I mean, there's a very famous sort of political era called the Scramble for Africa, where all of these different European powers were carving up Africa. A lot of the borders of various African states that exist today were carved out by European powers in order to control various African countries, to the point where they were carving borders right through the middle of different civilizations. So these borders make no sense. These borders are, completely European, completely imperialist, which is why there's such a strong history of Pan-Africanism. And Traore walks in the footsteps of a lot of Pan-Africanist leaders who have come before him, and a lot of Pan-Africanist leaders who have been killed. And he understands this. He understands what he needs to do in order to not become the next Lumumba or the next Sankara. And by the way, if you're interested in learning about more about the Pan-Africanist leaders who came before Traore, who inspire him, I just did a video about that on patreon.com/MidwesternMarx, where we now have Patreon exclusive videos from myself and Carlos very soon. We're going to be doing at least one a month. I've been doing multiple videos a month for the Patreon supporters. Those of you who fund our show, we appreciate that. Appreciate our super chatters, of course, but just so you know, Patreon takes less of your money. YouTube takes like 30% or something crazy. Patreon takes like 5%. So if you join us at patreon.com/MidwesternMarx, not only do you get Carlos's book, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism, which is sitting behind me there, but you'll also get a whole bunch of exclusive videos from me, including one on the great Pan-Africanist leaders who came before Traore. Battle Cossack. Oh, go ahead.
The folks over there at YouTube are bandits taking 30%.
Dude, they are. It's brutal.
I was looking through a video that I have on my phone with this comrade. This was in Venezuela. This was an individual from Mali who studied medicine in Cuba, was very much connected to the resistance forces that eventually, did the coup and brought the people's government into power. And he became like the leader of the president of like the medical institutions in Mali. And he was in Venezuela as an election observer, as an official representative. And I got to speak to him. As a Cuban myself, it was very easy to hit it off. We both have our Cuban accent ready to go in Spanish. And we talked quite a bit. And by the end of it, he wanted me to send a message to the leader of the Mali struggle, who's one of his best friends. And that was one of the things I'm the most proud of in my life. I recorded a 2 and some change minute video speaking in Spanish. He was translating it to French, and that video was supposedly sent to the leader of Mali, whose name I'm forgetting now. But him alongside the leader of Niger and Traore in Burkina Faso, I think are stirring up the pot in very novel and potentially extremely fruitful ways for all of those who seek to live in a world beyond capitalism.
Yes, Assimi Goita is the guy's name. That guy's a badass too. He's I think Traore is more the intellectual leader. The ideological leader there. But that guy is kind of hopping on board with everything Burkina Faso is doing. And another person who rose to power through the military, who was actually involved, in the military. There's all these pictures of him, in his military gear and with guns and whatever, who was part of this coup, this sort of progressive military coup. I've had a few people, not a lot, but a few people who give the old Trotskyite argument, military coups can't be progressive. Military juntas, by the fact that they're military juntas, can't be progressive. And it's just so stupid. They're saying because they take the form of a military junta, we're going to ignore all of their content and consider it reactionary. You have to look at the actual content of the military junta. This is actually something we've talked a lot about on Midwestern Marx. Like when we were talking about Peru had a similar thing in like the 70s, where they had a military leader who was able to organize a coup against a reactionary neoliberal imperialist government. And enact a lot of positive left-wing changes, including a new constitution in Peru that was much more progressive than the previous one. So there's absolutely historical precedent for progressive military juntas and progressive coups If you deny that, you're just not looking at the content of what's going on here. You're not looking at what these military juntas are doing as compared to what was being done by the previous Western colonial administration. But Savita G, $5. Thank you, comrade. Appreciate you. Will ACB issue a statement of support of the more than 1 million workers going on strike in India on May 20th? I'm sure we will if that happens. We have been eager or quick to support, Indian farmer strikes and Indian workers' actions going on there. Obviously not huge fans of the Modi government. And there's a huge communist pro-worker movement in India, so we're obviously in support of that. We've had to be very careful with the India-Pakistan conflict, because it's a hot-button issue. But from my own personal perspective, from the perspective of Eddie Liger Smith and not, the ACP, Free Kashmir, obviously the ACP leans in that direction as well. You just got to be careful when you're speaking objectively as a party for, hundreds of people. We want to see a peaceful resolution, and we want to see socialism and the working class prevail in Pakistan and in India. But what's going on in Kashmir is horrific. The Indian, Hindutva-esque government, NATO-aligned government is a steaming pile of garbage. And they're the reason that China has lifted as many people out of poverty in the last 70 years as India currently has in poverty today. Perfect example of capitalism versus socialism right there. Even Kerala, India versus the rest of India is a perfect example of capitalism versus socialism. So Free Kashmir, and I imagine the party will say something about that when the workers rise up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so sad because India has so much potential. Nehru was a big fan of the Bolshevik Revolution and Lenin.
Nehru is cool.
And it's sad, it's two civilizational projects, one freed in 47, the other in 49. And they really show, the trajectories that await countries that take either the socialist or the capitalist path. There's China, the most successful country on the planet. The country with the most promise, growing the quickest, uplifted, almost 900 million people out of poverty, is responsible for something along the lines of 80% of the people have been lifted out of poverty in general around the world. And then there's India, still struggling, still in the condition China was maybe 40, 50 years ago. That's, if you want proof of whether capitalism or socialism are superior models of economic development, look no further than the comparison between India and China.
Yeah, absolutely. Nehru I believe he ended up going with the non-aligned movement, which I get it. Like, they were based in that they opposed Western imperialism, but it's like, why didn't you just ally with the Soviets? Why did you have to be different? And, I would give the same advice to the African states today. Ally with Russia, ally with China. You don't need to have such complete independence to the point where you isolate yourself from the rest of the world. If there's someone reaching out to give you a hand, to give you help, when there's another giant superpower trying to destroy you, take the hand. Take the hand that's offering to help you. You don't need to be defiant against them. But that's it's been a consistent thing in the global South, and I get it. You don't just want to take orders from a more anti-imperialist superpower, but sometimes you have to be pragmatic. And that's another thing I like about Traore is he seems to understand that. And one of the things people have criticized him for is, why is he forging relations with Russia and China? Well, they're going to help him combat the U.S. imperialists and save the people of his country and nationalize the resources, and they're not trying to rob him. So why would he not? Why would he shoot himself in the foot by cutting off potential allies, by burning bridges with powerful countries who want to help him? But anyways, non-aligned movement was still based. Nehru was based, but Nasser was based, but come on, side with the Soviet Union. If you guys would have done that, maybe things would have worked out better. But anyways, can't complain about what happened 50 years ago. Back from the road, $20 super chat. Thank you, comrade. Appreciate you, brother. I'm glad you got back before Gordon Chang's predicted collapse of China next Tuesday. That's funny as hell because I just did an advertisement for Carlos's class, which, by the way, you can now take Marxism seminar, full seminar. Not a class that we have running year round, very special class, very good class where you can learn, Marxism. You can learn a whole bunch about the core theories of Marxism from Carlos. You're using Carlos as your guide. Midwestern Marx, sellfi.com/Midwestern Marx. Just search Midwestern Marx Sellfi. But anyways, I made an advertisement for Carlos saying that he was a better analyst of China than Gordon Chang, and it got more likes than any advertisement I've ever gotten because apparently people hate Gordon Chang. But Back from the road says, seriously, though, I only spent a few days there on the way to the DPRK years ago and have always wanted to go back. That's cool. You were lucky to get to go to the DPRK. We got to sneak in there now because of the U.S. restrictions on travel. That's probably the number one place I want to go in the world is the DPRK. But yeah, what do you think about Gordon Chang and Peter Zeihan and all these people who have made entire careers off of predicting China's collapse in the next 10 years or so? You were just there. Do you feel like they're about to collapse?
I love them. I think we need more of them because the more idiots like that that are proven wrong by this thing called the world, the more the American people realize that this class of Western experts are just a bunch of big old phonies. It's, you can insert here the clip from Patrick Starr where he's saying, "You're a great big phony." I think it's Patrick. I don't know. It might be something
Yeah,
else.
no, that is.
Because that's what they are. I mean, their analysis is, as valuable as the water you use to clean a dog. I mean, it's complete garbage. It's not based on the actual facts. It's quite literally ideological, and it's interesting because these are the same ideologues and so-called experts that claim that we have entered a somehow post-ideological age after the defeat of socialism in 1991. But they're quite literally the most ideological you can possibly get. They go from the presumptions and ideas in their head to the world and not from the world to the ideas that they end up holding. And that's how you can end up with individuals who have predicted every year for the last 25 years that China's going to fall. And all that you have seen is quite literally the contrary.
Yeah, I actually saw some liberal intellectuals recently mocking Peter Zeihan for these ridiculous predictions because even some of the liberals recognized that he was just pushing this for book deals, because he knows with a provocative title like The Coming Collapse of China, he's going to be able to sell some books. But it's so embarrassing. I don't know about you, Carlos, but it's probably even worse for you as an author and a published author. I'm working on a book. I'll be an author eventually, but our buddy Hazaldin and I are struggling to actually finish our books, and our buddy Noah Krachivik. Now that I now that I think about it as well, but I freak out if I get anything even a little bit wrong. If I put something out there that's even a little bit wrong, I have a panic attack and this existential moment where I'm like, oh, what do I know anyways? I got to go read for the next 3 days in order to actually get my knowledge up to where I'm not posting things that are wrong. And it could be the smallest little mistake that nobody notices. These people have built their careers off of predicting that China's going to collapse while China has gone up and up and up and up and become the most powerful economy on earth. Lifted so many people out of poverty while the U.S. is decaying and trapping so many people in poverty and debt and bankruptcy and all this. So it's just unbelievable that these people exist. But the heights of opportunism, there's no end to it. In this neoliberal system, the lengths that people will go in order to lie just to make money are truly unbelievable. And these people have no souls. A lot of the ACP haters who lead up the attacks against the ACP, I'm like, man, these people's souls are damaged. You just lie so much for no reason for so long. It's like, are you even a human at that point?
Yeah, it's very sad, and they're very. I mean, the paradox is that they call themselves not only socialists, but they have this true Scotsman logical fallacy where they're the only true socialists, the only true Marxists, and it's very sickening. And I usually don't like going to Lacanian or psychoanalytical categories, but because of my reading of Zizek, I have come to understand their obsession with ACP as a sort of object petite A for them. It's like the object cause of desire, the thing that they impose on the world in order to have a nice little cogent and coherent narrative about what is going on in the world. And it's not objectively coherent, but it provides subjective coherence for them. And you could tell it's something ideological because even when the facts are completely contrary to the narrative that they have constructed, somehow they can always spin the facts to extremes of absurdity in order to actually have counterfacts be facts that support their narrative. And we saw that when our comrades Jackson and Haas and Chris Alali were in Lebanon for the funeral of Nasrallah. Instead of realizing, okay, maybe these ideas that I've been holding and that have been imposed on my mind about ACP leaders and the ACP being feds and all this other nonsense, maybe if they are here in these places that have the most advanced security apparatuses, because they're literally fighting against imperialism, and if they don't have the most advanced security, they will fall. Maybe these guys are not feds. Maybe the security systems of Cuba and Venezuela and Russia and China and Lebanon and everything else, Hamas, who was interviewed by Jackson, and Chris Alali, maybe those security systems are more correct about us not being feds than random people with anime profile picture and all sorts of interesting flags on their bio. Maybe those guys are not the most credible source on our standing as individuals and as an organization. But no, instead of having their narrative deconstructed by a fact that very evidently destroys their whole narrative, they go to the extremes of the absurd and say the intelligence apparatuses of all of these countries have failed, and they have let the Mossad agents, the CIA agents in to their countries. Hopefully they wisen up. And you see, of course, here a little bit of Western arrogance because these keyboard warriors who haven't showered in 3 days, have better insights than those people who have literally won the struggle for political power and have sustained political power in the face of constant imperialist hybrid warfare. Somehow those are the guys that are missing in their analysis, and them, the brave keyboard warriors, they're the ones that are correct. So this is how the object petite A functions for people. It's an ideological entity that structures their reality, where even counterfacts are spun in such a way as to support their narrative of how the world is shaped.
Yeah, I'll never forget there was one post after Jackson went somewhere that was like regimes calling the socialist countries regime, sort of as a meme, because that's what the propagandists call them. Like, regime, step your game up. Regime, step your intelligence up. You're letting this Fed in. As if we all know here on leftist Twitter that this guy's a Fed. But Hamas and the Venezuelan government and Maduro, they don't know shit, so they're letting this guy in. Like, step your game up. Like, why don't you step your game up, bitch? You're not running a socialist country. You're sitting in the belly of the beast in the empire that's crushing all these other countries and crying about Jackson Hinkle on the internet all day. Why don't you step your game up? Why don't you realize that you're actually going against what the vast majority of the anti-imperialist world believes. And these people have no idea what they believe in. They literally make up things in their head about existing socialist countries to claim like all they care about is LGBTQ issues and pronouns and stuff. You know, Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, they like banned a lot of the LGBTQ stuff. You know, are we going to condemn them? Are we going to say that, yeah, now I support the CIA and the NED overthrowing them because they're not in favor of a lot of this LGBTQ stuff? Like, come on. Most of the anti-imperialist world agrees on this stuff, and they see the hyper obsession. I'm not even against, you know, do whatever you want sexually or in terms of your gender identity or whatever. I don't care. But a lot of these countries see the hyper obsession on identity politics and LGBTQ issues and wrapping everything in a rainbow flag as a way of enforcing Western cultural values on the global South, on the Middle East, on Asia. It's a way of pushing Western culture on these countries, and it gets used as a tool of regime change when the media says, oh, Iran doesn't have, you know, the same kind of women's rights as we do. We need to go to war with them. We need to overthrow them. We need to overthrow these entire governments for, you know, the liberation of the LGBTQ community. This is a scam. This is imperialism wrapped in a rainbow flag. And this is the way that a lot of the anti-imperialist world sees it. But yet we're fascists. The people who are welcomed with open arms by the anti-imperialist world, by Ansar Allah and all this shit, we're the fascists because we don't drape ourselves in a rainbow flag. And that's not me being hateful, dude. We have gay people, we have trans people, we have all sorts of different kinds of people in our party. We don't give a shit. If you're willing to fight for the working class, you can fight alongside us. I don't care outside of that, right? But when it comes to the LGBTQ politics, the LGBTQ lobby, and the use of LGBTQ issues for the purpose of imperialism, that's a different thing. And that's a thing that the entire anti-imperialist world is against. But you have these Western leftists who claim that they're the ones who support these anti-imperialist countries. We're the ones who support China, but the ACP's fascist because they don't wrap themselves in a rainbow flag. When was the last time you saw Xi Jinping talking about LGBTQ issues or wearing a rainbow flag? Like, come on now. They're actually promoting, you know, masculinity and more heteronormativity in China, if you want to get into it. But yeah, it's quite ridiculous. Quite a ridiculous situation we're still in here in the U.S. Things have changed. The dynamic and the environment in the American left has definitely changed in the last few years, largely because of the ACP. But it's still quite an absurd, upside-down twilight zone that we're operating in here in the old United States.
Eddie, this keyboard warrior who doesn't even have the courage to put their actual face on says that your face needs a fist in it pretty badly. What do you got to say to that?
I mean, you're welcome to try. You're going to be on the ground with your hands behind your back in 6 seconds top, but you're welcome to try.
You should try. You should literally try. I swear to God, please do try to punch Eddie in the street. I beg you, try to punch Eddie in the street. I really do. If you've ever listened to anything that I've said, listen to this. Go punch Eddie in the street. Please do that, you know. And record it. Have a friend record you trying to punch Eddie in the street.
There's nothing I would love more. I pray to God every day. Please let one of our online haters who's threatened to kill me actually try to do it. Please. There's nothing I would like more. Another super chat. Well, we got Mig here. Thank you. He says, yo, $5. Thank you, Mig. Appreciate you, brother. Jason Cerullo, the power lifter of our community. Bread and butter issues, the theories that they only care about sexuality issues is due to infiltrators of Marxist parties to create discord and illegitimacy by downplaying bread and butter. Absolutely. I mean, that's all it is. I mean, it's been funded by ruling class apparatuses from the beginning. Lots of people have detailed this in scholarly work, Carlos being one of them, talking about the infiltration of the left, this obsession with purity that's been pushed upon us, hyper obsession with sexual and identity-based issues rather than the bread and butter, fighting for, the things that unite us. Instead, they want us hyper-focused on the things that could possibly divide us. So couldn't
I
agree more.
recommend everyone read this essay. It's pretty short, by Christian Parenti. Diversity is a ruling class ideology. And he makes the argument basing himself on the Federalist Papers and Federalist 10 from James Madison, where Madison is writing basically to the elite of the country that are scared that formal bourgeois democracy is going to lead to their privileges being stripped. And he says, look, guys, the fracture that we have to be worried about is the most fundamental and basic one, basically between the haves and the have-nots. And even though that faction is dangerous, the way you overcome the danger of that faction is by creating many factions in the have-nots. Don't have the have-nots think of themselves as have-nots, Don't have the workers basically think of themselves as workers. Have all of these infinite amount of identities that they can identify personally as, that distract them from the very common and basic identity of being poor, of being working class, of being indebted, whatever you want to see as the foundational common denominator that we all share as poor, working class, or working mass people. And this ideology of wokeism accomplishes in a reverse form the same thing that racism did. Racism told the white worker, your white identity is more important than your economic status as a working class person. Even though you might have 99% more in common with the black worker, focus on the literally superficial skin color that you have in common with the capitalist that keeps you poor and indebted, and be a tool to oppress the black worker. That was a form of tribalism. Now with wokeism, we have the same thing except with the progressive veneer, where we have these bullshit safe spaces, and all it promotes is you thinking about yourself, not as a worker, not as a poor person, but as a member of this tribalized identity, where somehow, because someone like Jay-Z is the same skin color as you, they're a part of that group now. Even though if you're a working class black person, what the fuck do you have in common with Jay-Z besides the literal skin color on you, which is the most superficial and meaningless fucking thing that human beings literally have? It's the same thing with this new resurgence of racism on Twitter and Instagram, etc. It's literally fucking stupid. It's a sign that perhaps mental asylums shouldn't have been closed down. Because in 2025, to be a racist, you have to be a very special type of fucking stupid. So that's the logic of wokeism. It's tribalism, but in a different progressive veneer. And we say, fuck that. We have to focus on the fact that we are working class peoples or different parts of the working masses. We have more in common with each other. And we have in common a fundamental enemy. And that's what we have to focus on. Not all of these divisions that have already, most of them, been historically addressed by successful class struggle movements against racism and against sexism in our country. That because they have been successful, today we can have the luxury to say, let's just focus on class. Because those struggles have been successful. We did have a civil rights revolution. We had a women's movement that actually brought a form of de jure equality for women. Because we had that, today we can say, let's focus on what we all share, which is being workers.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was fighting with the guy in the comments. Addison, ACP member, new ACP Central Committee member. Shout out to our boy Addison. Great honor. He was announced and inaugurated at the recent event. I'm grateful for the ACP because they inspired me to leave my mom's basement to take a shower. You stupid fuck. Yes, thank you. Addison hadn't taken a shower in years, and the ACP inspired him to leave.
This man is such a liar. He's going to get purged just for lying, because he spent like 2 years living the dream, traveling all across America, riding buffaloes in Idaho. I don't even know if there's buffaloes in Idaho, but he was riding them there. And the footage he showed us from this like 2-year trip across the most unexplored parts of America was literally like, I was extremely jealous. So he's never been in a basement in his life. He's only been in attics on top of all of us looking down. And that's it.
Absolutely.
Shout out to Addison. Happy
Love
birthday,
that.
by the way. It was his birthday a few days ago.
Oh yeah, happy birthday, Addison. He's performing soon in the area, and I'm trying to make it to that if possible. Any more episodes of Escaping the Cave soon, says Coheaven.
Yes, I stopped the Escaping the Cave show because I was in the middle of refining my dissertation and planning to defend it. But now that I've finished the graduation process, that should be coming back within maybe less than a month. I'm also rearranging where I'm at, so I want to create a much nicer streaming and recording environment, so the production quality is as high as humanly possible. So, but yeah, it's going to come back this summer.
Nice. I'm looking forward to that myself. That's why I brought that one up. Got another super chat here. Back from the road. Thank you. Went to the DPRK about 6 months before the ban went in place. Oh, interesting. For U.S. citizens on an international drug-resistant tuberculosis mission. Oh, interesting. That's probably one of the only ways you can get in. I know someone who was able to get to Cuba that way on like a charity mission related. I think it was through the Catholic Church or something. Very eye-opening, especially due to not going on a tour guide style trip. 10 out of 10. Oh, that'd be really cool because I know we talked to Professor Derek Ford, who had been to the DPRK, but I think he was on like a very guided trip. Be very interesting to go without tour guides there. Could be a little weird too, because I'm sure people in the DPRK aren't used to just seeing white people walking around. I don't know if you're white, but for me, that would be a little weird. It'd be like, what the hell is this guy doing here? But yeah, sounds awesome. I mean, there are very, very viral videos of people just like going to the DPRK and getting a haircut because that's all it takes to blow open the Western myths about the country. But
did you see the marathon guy?
What?
The guy that was there for the marathon?
I didn't hear about that.
They just did a marathon where I think they allowed a couple Americans to go, and there was this famous streamer whose whole thing is going to places that are seen as troublesome by the U.S. and he ran the marathon in the DPRK.
Interesting. That's cool. I'm gonna have to check that out.
And totally non-political. He was just like there, showing what was going on and dispelling myths just by being there.
Wow. Did you hear that? Since this stream is kind of about Traore, Kim Jong-un said the DPRK would commit troops if the U.S. tried to overthrow Traore. How fucking based is that? It's the most based thing they've done since sending troops to Ukraine. Like, the DPRK is such an inspiring country. They are like old school Soviet communists. Like, we're fighting imperialism on the global stage. We'll send our troops to fight, reactionary fascist governments. We'll send our troops to help revolutionary governments like Traore's. What an inspiration those people in the DPRK are. With all that they've suffered through. 20% of their population. One person in every family of 5. Think about that, Americans. You probably have a family of at least 5. I have 5. One person in every family of 5 murdered by the United States in the Korean War. And they're still out here, sovereign, independent, and sending their troops to help revolutionary governments fight the U.S. How could you not have, how could that not inspire you? How could you not have solidarity with that?
In Cuba, we would say that they have tremendo cojones. A lot of
tremendo cojones.
It's an incredibly courageous people, and the level of dehumanization that they're subjected to by the Western media is completely incredible. I mean, to even begin to believe the sorts of myths that are said about the DPRK, you would have to have the presupposition that somehow either they're less than human, or they're quantitatively less human than the sorts of humans that you engage with in the West. Because why would a human being be in a situation where the rats eat the people eat the rats, and it's just this cycle of rat and people eating each other? These sorts of myths are so ridiculous, and in the face of that dehumanization, they stand up strong. They develop their security apparatuses, which is perhaps the most important, which is what I would encourage all of the countries fighting against imperialism to do. As Comrade Jackson says, get a nuke. There's no better deterrent um, from imperialist attacks than literally having a nuke. And it's very unfortunate, but it's objectively what is true. And we can dig our heads in the sand and say, let's be pacifists and sing kumbaya and do whatever the fuck. But no, it's when countries have the bomb that they are not fucked with, as the DPRK. Compare the DPRK to Gaddafi. That's all I have to say.
Sí, los uvos grandes. That's what one of my Spanish teachers taught me to say once. The big grapes instead of cojones. He taught us uvos, which is grapes. Still working on my Spanish. ACB leading the way for the working class. Much love and support from Texas. Hell yeah. Thank you, comrade. I work very closely on a daily basis with one of Texas' leading members, Comrade Seymour Red, who's leading up the ACP Texas Instagram account right now, which everyone should follow if they haven't yet. It's experimental. We're getting the ACP Texas account off the ground before we spread it party-wide and take over Instagram with our party. But Texas is doing a lot of great things. Texas has a lot of badass, competent, hardworking, intelligent members. We actually have an interview with a ACB Texas member dropping soon, which I'm looking forward to. But thank you so much, comrade, for the $10. We will use it to advance the struggle of the party, and I might use it to help ACB Texas. We're actually, with the ACP media department, we're saving up for a drone right now. So any money you send to patreon.com/MidwesternMarks, where you get exclusive content and a copy of Carlos's book, is going to go towards the ACP drone. Any super chats you send us over here will also help go towards the ACP drone, so we can get big, wide shots of our people marching. Madeline Pendleton, that weird TikTok chick, recently accused us of using AI to make it look like we have more members than we do, which people have no idea how AI technology works. That would take way too long for us to do. But anyways, we want to have a drone.
What an honor. We have such big crowds that they have to resort to saying they're AI.
Kind of based, which is why we want a drone, so we can capture these wide shots of all our audience and then people of all our members and people who can't talk shit. But it really is an honor that they think we have to animate our membership. Sorry, Carlos. Hopefully no one sees this one. Wow, if the 9% of chronic poor whites could unite with one non-whites in the U.S., capitalism would be defeated. Been advocating for this for years. Yeah, I mean, there was a meme that was going around a while back that the left wing was mocking. And it was like a white guy in like a Confederate flag jacket, like giving a fist bump to a black guy in a BLM jacket. And it was like, I got your back, brother. And it was like, this is what the establishment fears. And the left was mocking it. And, I mean, I get it. Like, yeah, the Confederacy is reactionary. You can't support the you shouldn't support the Confederacy. However, the general sentiment behind the meme is true. Black and white unite and fight. Come on. Obviously, dude. Obviously, black people who are poor don't have anything in common with fucking Obama. Obviously, white people who are poor don't have anything in common with Bill Gates. And obviously, Bill Gates and Obama are non-Jewish people who help run the system. So if you're only focused on the Jews, or you're only focused on the whites, or you're only focused on the blacks, you're a dumbass. and the ruling class has you wrapped around their finger. If we unite by class, if we say we're all workers and these people robbing us need to get overthrown and we need to redistribute their wealth, that's the key. That's what they're terrified of. They would love nothing more than for the anti-establishment revolutionary energy in America to be filtered towards Hitlerism, towards a guy who was, on meth all the time and selling out to the big banks. That's exactly what they want. Just sit there and be schizophrenic about the Jews all day while you support private bankers who aren't Jewish, while you support giant corporations robbing us blind just because they aren't Jewish. It's the most ridiculous shit. Race essential. I've always said this. Race essentialism is where thinking goes to die. It's how they stop all thinking and get you to whatever that word Carlos was saying the other day. A lot of people, their object, whatever, is the Jews. That's all.
Oh yeah. Object petite. Yeah.
Yes.
The object causes the desire.
It's a trap.
Well, that's the example that Zizek provides with. He says, yeah, I know you've seen this. He says that basically that Pokemon Go is basically like homologous to how the Nazis treated the Hitler, where it's, they add something onto reality in order to make sense of it. It's like the super real phenomenon that ends up then giving some level of coherence to the narrative. But, one of my favorite things that was done, and I think it was done very successfully, was when Infrared and Haas decided to do like the JQ but with the Irish, and they just started getting all of the Irish like businessmen and elites and just doing like very JQ style posters with the Irish, because it's that level of stupidity. It's something that you could do with literally any group, because what matters is not the group. What matters is the social relation that is at play there. You can remove the variables and interchange them and do whatever the fuck you want with them. What matters is the social relation. And that's the difference between a Marxist critical approach and the ones that come from these so-called JQers. They think in very metaphysical forms. They reify everything. They forget about relations. They just analyze factors, individual entities. And what Marxists analyze is fundamentally process and relations. That's the capital itself, which is central to Marxist political economy, is a relational concept. This thing in front of me is a thing, but as soon as I have great notes, by the way. Look at all these fucking notes. As soon as it starts getting used as an instrument in accumulation, it becomes capital, right? Money itself is not capital. As soon as it gets used and put into the logic and the relation of M to M prime, it becomes capital. So we focus on relations. That's why if it's a Jew, if it's a Catholic, if it's an Irish, who gives a fuck? It's the relationship that they're embedded in that matters.
That's so true. And the more you'll read Marxist Capital, the more you'll realize, the more you'll understand what Carlos just said there and how true it is, and how foundational it is to the Marxist worldview to see things in their interconnection and their relationship. And if you view things just in isolation, statically, it leads to all these errors of analysis. And that's what the JQers do. It's just hyperfixate on this static, abstract category of the Jew, and they can't see relations, between various aspects of the totality that we refer to as capitalism. Pee-wee Gymnast, thank you for the $2, bro. Did you know that there are no taxes in the DPRK? I did know that. Very interesting. Very good talking point, actually, for Americans. Because a lot of Americans are scared of taxes, rightfully so. Their taxes are sent to endless wars. So and a lot of them think that socialism is just, tax the rich, which is one of the problems, actually, that Carlos and I had with the Bernie campaign, where it was just like we had to argue to people about taxes all the time. It's like they didn't want to hear, tax me a little bit more and the government will pay for my healthcare, because they don't trust the government. They don't trust the IRS. They don't trust these systems, rightfully so. What they wanted to hear was that this whole system needs to be busted up and destroyed. So yeah, I did know that, and it's a very interesting point. Carlos seems to be criticizing identity politics, but not intersectionality. Do you want to get into this at all,
Yeah,
Carlos? Or
I'll
no?
just do it quick. Intersectionality presupposes in a very similar fashion to the critique that I just made of like reified entities and no relations. It presupposes that there's these different identity groups that people are a part of and they all intersect. And correct analysis is an analysis that brings these disparate parts together and sees how they blend into this unique experience of oppression or exploitation. And you have concepts of triple exploitation or triple oppression that develop if you're a black woman and a worker and all this other stuff. And the problem is that the very foundation already presupposes a certain division that is not there, a certain division of identity groups that then you analytically bring together in your mind as a theoretical operation. And you're already starting from a form of unhealthy abstraction. The reality is that, for the Marxists, if there is a struggle against racism, that's not a race struggle, that is a class struggle. If you have a struggle against racism that takes the form of Ibrahim Kendi and all this woke, form of
Ibram
racial
X. Kendi, yeah, yeah.
Ibram X. Kendi and all this form of woke race essentialist thought that we have today, it's not a class struggle. It's a class struggle. It's just a class struggle uh, by the managerial class on behalf of the ruling class and against the working class. So class struggle is ever present. It's always there. And sometimes these other seemingly identity struggles take the form of a class struggle, like the struggle against patriarchy or the struggle against racism that most of American history took the front lines of the class struggle. But when that happens, it's just a fucking class struggle. It's not this intersection of race struggle and class struggle. No, it's race. It's the struggle for Black freedom as a class struggle. And that's a very important distinction because it starts not with these reified identity groups that you then bring together as a theoretical operation, but with a fundamental recognition of the objective interconnection that already exists in all of these groups.
Absolutely. And if you want to hear more about that, Noah has done full shows, like full streams about intersectionality, diving deeper into what Carlos just said. It's one of those things that sounds radical on its surface. But what it ends up doing ultimately is getting rid of Marxist class analysis. And then if you actually give a Marxist class analysis, you get reproached as being class reductionist. When in reality, it's the intersectionality theorists who aren't taking class into account enough, who are trying to bury class and all these different distinctions about race and all these other pure abstractions, like
Parentheses ABC.
anything but class is what they want. Intersectionality ends up just being that. That's the simplest way to say it. And I mean, if you're in college, if you're just starting out as a leftist, you might be resistant to hearing that. Give it some time. Spend some time on the left trying to fight for the working class, and you'll see exactly what we mean. Pavel, thank you, comment. What?
It's a dead end.
It's a dead end. It really is. Just like a lot of these non-ACP communist parties in America who base themselves in these bourgeois theories. It seems very radical. It feels very fun when you're at the protests surrounded by all these people who agree with you, but they're getting about the same amount of support every single year, year after year after year. They're not growing, and there's a reason for that. Pavel, thank you, comrade, for the $5 or €5, €6 actually. Hi, I cannot post anything. YouTube censors me. Lots of love from Austria. That sucks, Pavel. Sorry to hear that, but thank you so much for the €6, brother. Appreciate you. Solidarity to you and the other Austrian comrades. Red Patriot, what's up, brother? I'm a big fan of Red Patriot. Young ACP comrade, very intelligent. Soon to be brilliant, I'm sure. Just give him a few years, and he'll be an intellectual on behalf of the party, prominent intellectual. But anyways, I rode up north with Ronnie Reagan across the Mexican border on wheelchairs of fire. Nice. Is that a reference to like a Reagan quote or something? It probably is. Cerulo, Jason, thank you again for the $5. Jason Cerulo, another super chat from Jason. Ford attacked the Jews in the Dearborn Express because a Jewish journalist was revealing how oppressive he was to his workers. Doesn't surprise me. Henry Ford was a virulent anti-Semite, a typical capitalist. He had a lot of innovative ideas to the point where the Soviet Union was actually adopting some of his ideas, which is pretty cool, and shows how non-dogmatic Marxists around the world can be, to the point where they'll even accept, Fordist ideas. But overall, yeah, Henry Ford was a Hitler-sympathizing, capitalist, greedy bastard. And there was recently a libertarian post that said Henry Ford created the 8-hour work week, not unions. And even Elon Musk's Grok, which recently has been exposed for being programmed by Elon to push certain political narratives, debunked that and said, no, it was the unions, and Henry Ford actively fought against the 8-hour work week for a long time before finally having to accept it because of pressure from the unions. But anyways.
Yeah. You know what's crazy? There were so many Ford factories in Nazi Germany. And the U.S. had an agreement with Henry Ford and the major capitalists that were invested in Nazi Germany that they couldn't bomb those factories. And so what Nazi soldiers used to do was to go to the Ford factory because they knew it wouldn't be bombed. And in the few instances where it was bombed, guess what happened after the war? The U.S. paid reparations to Ford and other big capitalists for damage to their properties, as those properties were actively aiding the Nazi war machine in Germany. So, yes, so much to the narrative that it was the U.S. who beat the Nazis. Get the fuck out of here.
No shit, yeah. They used Ford factories as bomb shelters, essentially, because they knew the U.S. wouldn't hit any private capital with their bombs. Craziness. Chima Madu, thank you for the $5, brother. What do you say about those who claim North Korea isn't communist but an absolute monarchy run by the Kim family? It's just not true. There's democracy in the DPRK. The Kim family is at the head. They run by election every year. They're elected. I don't know what'll happen after Kim Jong-un. It seems like there's not... his sister might be next in line, but I don't know if the next supreme leader will even be in that family, because like I said, it is democratically elected. But there's many other government officials in very, very important positions outside of the Kim family. But the Kim family is just, it'd be like, if George Washington lived 60 years ago and fought the Revolutionary War 60 years ago, but also another country came in and killed 20% of our population, and George Washington fought them off. And then George Washington's kid was a very successful politician who developed our country and brought our country into the modern era. And then George Washington's grandson was also an extremely competent politician. I mean, Kim Jong-un has a brother, I believe, who isn't as into politics, who isn't as ambitious, and, he just kind of chills out, works like a regular job in the DPRK. He isn't a politician. Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un were very competent, intelligent political thinkers, so they were able to take over after their grandfather and father. But if there weren't competent, intelligent thinkers in the Kim family, they wouldn't get elected. But you have to understand the level of prestige and honor and admiration that the Kim family has in this country, because Kim Il-sung, there were U.S. regiments and, regiments in the U.S.-backed fascist forces in Korea whose whole job was to hunt down Kim Il-sung because he was such an effective organizer, such an effective military strategist, such an effective Marxist-Leninist theorist, right? This is Kim Jong-un's grandfather. So you can imagine the amount of admiration that he has in this country that sacrificed a fifth of their population to fighting off foreign invaders, that he was able to unify the country and fend off these foreign invaders and keep the country's sovereignty. I mean, if you were in their shoes, you would have so much admiration for this man and this family that they would be sort of like heroes, and that's what they are. but at the same time, they're elected. They're still working. They're still doing jobs, and they don't just run the DPRK with an iron fist. That would be impossible. You need administrators. You need people in charge of the different sectors of the economy, and almost all of these different positions are voted for by the people of the DPRK. And of course, you need a little bit of authority and even dictatorship to fend off imperialism and continue to develop your economy. So to look at that authority and say that this is monarchy is completely absurd, and ignoring all the other factors that go into this. Sure, there's a cult of personality, but cult of personalities aren't always a bad thing, man. They really aren't. And that's one of the good cult of personalities in world history and in the world today.
Guys, the Lenin says in State and Revolution pretty clearly that the dictatorship of the proletariat is going to take an infinite amount of forms. And having a family that has been extremely successful in liberating and uplifting a country, be continuously in power generation after generation after generation, is one of those forms. You have to ask a more important question, not focus on who is the specific entity that's leading, but on the structural and relational analysis that we have quite literally been trying to hammer into all of your heads for the last 45 minutes. Is it a dictatorship of the proletariat? All right, let's analyze it. Is the state working actively to protect the sovereignty of the national existence, to fight off imperialism, to uplift and unleash the forces of production and uplift the living standards of the people? Well, if you go down the list, all of those are absolute yeses. So it's a dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, who the fuck cares who is in power? Who cares? What individual is in power, as long as they are exerting the will of the people and defending sovereignty and fighting off imperialism. That is literally all that matters. Now, if you analyze it from a cultural standpoint, it makes perfect sense, as Eddie said, why this family would be revered. They have done the job. They have served the people. They have won the people's confidence, respect, admiration. And the cult of personality is an extremely stupid category, in my opinion. The cult of personality is people who are unpopular, coping about the fact that people are successful and popular with regular working class people and the general population. It's a category that's made up by people who are too much of losers and too unpopular to be liked. And it's not without reason that it comes from Trotskyists and the Western Marxists, who have never done anything and haven't won anyone over to the side besides academics doing the same sort of stupid work as what they're doing. So, let the Kims be in power for another 1,000 years in North Korea, and let one of those Kim families unify Korea. That is all that I can hope for at the moment.
Absolutely, couldn't have said it better myself. QWERTY, thank you for the $3 from California. How do Marxists describe the word dictator? Actually, this would probably, Carlos, you can probably explain what dictatorship of the proletariat means better than me. But basically, a dictatorship of the masses is what we want. A dictatorship of the working class, which represents the vast majority of society. And what is a dictatorship of the vast majority of society besides an actual democracy? Oh, shoot, I got to grab my computer charger. Go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah, I always like to approach the question of quote-unquote dictatorship from its opposite, a word that Americans are very fond of, which is democracy. Democracy is broken up into demos, which means popular people. In Spanish, we'd say the pueblo. In English, we'd say the masses. It's not just people in general. And kratos means power, the ability to rule, to exert authority over. So democracy means the ability of common people, of the masses, to exert authority over, to exert power, to rule. Friends, that is another way of saying the dictatorship of the proletariat. Here I'm doing the same thing that Hegel does with being and nothingness at the beginning of the logic, the science of logic. Being, pure being, indeterminate. Okay, so it has no determinations. There's no specific determination that you can put on being. That's why it's pure being. But then you analyze nothing, and nothing also is this category that is indeterminate. It has no specific determinations. And so you realize that, well, they end up being essentially the same, and you have to develop a new category, the category of becoming. Well, if you look at what democracy and what dictatorship of the proletariat mean, how we define each etymologically for democracy and the Marxist tradition for dictatorship of the proletariat, they're essentially the same thing. A dictatorship of the proletariat is basically the Marxist way of speaking about democracy. The ability to exert, uphold the people's will, the ability to have power in the hands of the people, or to put it in terms Americans should understand, to have a society or a government that is actually of, by, and for the people.
There you go. Absolutely. And there's some level of authority that needs to be exerted in order to establish that, especially in a world of imperialism and capitalist counter-revolution and all of this. I mean, imagine, I don't know about you, Carlos, but thinking about running the Department of Media within the ACP without any authority, it wouldn't work. I would blow my brains out. People, you need some kind of authority within an organization in order for it to run. And I mean, this is what Engels says in On Authority. There's a certain level of authority that's exerted by just being human, by needing to produce the things that we need in order to survive. Production needs to be managed in some way. The production of media needs to be managed by someone, and that person ends up being me. The Department of Education and the ACP needs to be managed by someone that ends up being Carlos, and that doesn't mean it's, this horrible dictatorship where we're whipping people and killing people. It's just giving people direction. And, that's what any socialist government needs to do. There needs to be some level of authority to establish and maintain the authority of the masses over the authority of the owning minority. But
I think that the just to get back, because they asked about dictator, I saw dictatorship for some reason. It's the same thing. Dictator in the interest of who? If it's in the interest of just himself and his clique, then you have an arrangement that's more akin to the traditional monarchies, where you had dictatorships for the aristocrats, and the top aristocrat, of course, being the king. If it's a dictator for the masses, then you have this sort of like leftist Bonapartist figure that you see in Caesar, that, some Chavistas say that you see in Chavez, or, that you really see in like most dictatorships of the proletariat.
Absolutely. And that kind of goes back, it's almost like coming full circle to what we were talking about earlier with some military juntas do represent the not the American masses, but the masses of the country. It depends on the content of whatever government is seizing power. And that's what, a lot of liberals love to ignore. This is just a dictatorship, ignoring the content of, what actually leads the U.S. media to call these countries dictatorships, which is the nationalization of resources, the expelling of Western occupying forces, all sorts of things like that. So you can have a dictatorship on behalf of the people. That's what a dictatorship of the proletariat is, and it's necessary in order to establish a real democracy, which seems kind of contradictory, but the more you study history, the more you realize that's the reality. But anything else you wanted to discuss today, Carlos? We've been going for an hour 45, almost 2 hours. It's been an awesome stream. This has been fun, but are there any other topics you want to hit on before we skedaddle?
I didn't even notice that time has flown.
I know.
I wanted to touch a little more on this cult of personality thing. It's an interesting question. Yes, we want to remain. We don't want veneration for a leader to get to the point where we ignore objective facts in front of us, right? That's part of the Mao Zedong thought critique of Cultural Revolution Maoism, which just ignores completely objective situations in front of them in favor of it's just book worshiping, right? We don't want that. But then again, like, to have it as an explicit purpose to prevent a cult of personality from arising, I think you're putting the cart before the horse, man. Let whatever is going to lead to working and getting us in power and getting us to thrive once we're in power, let it arise, and then deal with the problems. If a cult of personality is what does it, and then they develop new problems, you deal with it when they develop. Can you imagine the Bolsheviks saying, "All right, let's not develop a cult of personality around Lenin. We have to prevent that before we can have a revolutionary movement." Or let's not develop a cult of personality around Stalin. We must prevent that before we, develop industrial military developments from like 5% of the economy to 43 so that we can beat the Nazis. Or the Chinese, let's not let a cult of personality develop around Mao. Let's prevent that. And then, no, it's you let happen what's going to happen organically. And if it works, okay. And if it doesn't, then you readjust. But let's not put the cart before the horse. Historically, look, Fidel tried to not have a cult of personality develop around him. And guess what? It fucking did. You know why it did? Because he was a great leader. His people loved him. And he literally gave his life and soul for the people. He was what Hegel would have called a great man of history, an agent of world spirit, someone who carried history forward. When you rise up to the occasion and you become that, you're going to be loved by millions and millions of people who are going to venerate you. And if that develops a cult of personality, whatever, you deal with it afterwards. That's my American pragmatist position on the topic.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, Che Guevara deserved the cult of personality that he got. He deserved it. He earned it. He says, this might sound like, like I'm falling into the cult of personality, but the man was a literal demigod. He literally lived like somebody who was infused with a purpose from a higher power, and was able to live every second of their life in that way. And yeah, people admire that. People look up to that. People are prone to admire individuals who they want to be like, who they want to replicate. There's nothing wrong with masses of people seeing folks like Fidel or like Che or like whoever else who are actually admirable revolutionary individuals and wanting to be like that, aspiring to have the same level of character. So I couldn't agree more. And I mean, we have that in America. People look at Abe Lincoln and unfortunately celebrities that way, but also, real figures, MLK, Abe Lincoln, whoever, Malcolm X, are idolized in American history and in the American consciousness. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We idolize them or sort of put them on a pedestal in our consciousness because of what they did historically, because we understand the contribution that they made to our history and the development of our society that allows us to live like we do today. And of course, that isn't complete. The revolution that they began isn't complete, but it's still good to uphold those figures, I think. And, like Carlos said, you got to be careful not having a purity fetish and thinking that anybody was perfect. But yeah, agree with everything he said, though. Michelle, thank you, comrade. Another $5 super chat from longtime YouTube member. Now that the Kursk area has been fully liberated, how long do you think the Zelensky regime will continue to fight before they finally negotiate? I don't know. They just keep going. I thought they'd retire a year ago. And, I thought Zelensky would say, okay, Russia won. I don't want to get put in a prison or killed for the rest of my life. So I'm going to give up here. But he doesn't seem to be doing that. He seems to be sticking with NATO and the imperialists to the very end. He really wants to fight to the last Ukrainian. So I don't know. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, there was recently the arrangement on the part of the Trump administration of discussions with the aim of achieving peace. And one of the interesting things is that when Zelensky tweeted about that meeting, he mentioned that Russia was going to cease fire and cease its operations for the meeting. That was never agreed to. So I think that could be used as a precedent to say that Russia agreed to stopping fire in order to have the discussions they didn't do that. Therefore, the discussions went south or whatever. But anyone who can read what actually were the conditions for having the discussions, which weren't any, would be able to see that as false. But again, these people are really good at spinning a narrative. So I don't know what's going to happen there. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, time will tell, I guess. Not looking good for Zelensky and crew, though, as has been the case for years now, actually. Ignacio, thank you for the $5, comrade. Appreciate you. When do you think Cuba will finally prosper despite Western sanctions and interference? I mean, they're doing the best they can. They'll prosper when we have a revolution here in America. I can tell you that. That's what we need to focus on as Americans. They were prospering more when the Pope pressured Obama to lift the sanctions, but we can't rely on that. You know, they're going to probably keep the sanctions on Cuba for the foreseeable future. We need a revolutionary movement here in the U.S. It's embarrassing as Americans that our government is starving out this small island country, this revolutionary island country with so much spirit and so much resistance, who's fought so hard for their freedom and independence for the last 70 plus years. You know, the fact that we're still keeping our boot on their neck is disgusting. And we should be embarrassed about it as Americans and fight for a revolutionary movement here. But I don't know that Cuba will be able to prosper when they're under a siege from the largest empire in the history of the world.
In America, we do very little with a whole lot. In Cuba, you do a whole lot with very little, as Fidel famously said. In that sense, there is a sense of prospering that that when understood on the basis of the conditions which they have, they are prospering. To do that much with that little is a feat, a great feat. You know, it's like tying up a swimmer's feet and arms, and you know, they might not have the best time, but if they got to the other side, that is a feat in its own right. So yes, Cuba has many noble achievements, but I think the comment is in the spirit of when is it going to start looking something akin to like what China looks, highly developed modern society. And I agree here fully with Eddie. Until the blockade, which is an asphyxiating, almost genocidal warfare on the Cuban people, until that comes down, it's going to be very hard. Even with them in BRICS, BRICS is at the moment it's getting some sort of political confidence, but it's mainly an economic arrangement that is trying to create a sort of economic dual power outside of the existing institutions of global finance capital, but which nonetheless is still composed of countries that are very much within the system of global capitalism that don't want to threaten. They don't want to threaten their ability to have access to what they have access to in the global market. So even with being in BRICS, I worry that might not help Cuba as much as we might think it would help. So quite literally, the only thing that I think could save Cuba, allow it to prosper, is having a revolution in the U.S., overthrowing this genocidal, asphyxiating blockade.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, any other topics you want to throw on the agenda today, Carlos?
No, I think we covered pretty much everything we had previously discussed. It was very good to stream again. I haven't streamed in maybe 6 weeks. I enjoy these streams very much. I enjoy talking with you on air, Eddie. I enjoy speaking with our viewers, which are as a part of Midwestern Marx as are both you and I. Without their support, there would be no Midwestern Marx, because after all, we're human beings living in this hellhole that is late stage, decrepit American capitalism. So without your support and views and likes and sharing and subscribing, sometimes even monetary support through your donations, through your Patreon memberships, through signing up for my class or buying books or doing everything else you can do to financially support us, it would quite literally be impossible for us to have survived this long. So it's as much your institute as it is ours. And it's a pleasure whenever I can speak to you directly and not just upload a short video to Instagram or something. Get to engage with you all live and directly. It always feels very good.
Yeah, I agree. It's always a good feeling getting to stream and talk to people directly, ACP members and whatever else. And if you want to support us financially, I mentioned multiple ways you can do so, Patreon and all those other means. But also, Carlos has another class, probably getting close to the deadline here to sign up. But
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow is the deadline. All right, people, sign up. I think we got quite a few new signups this time, which is cool. We were actually able to get an advertisement for the class to go somewhat viral, which is rare. So hopefully we'll have some new faces this time. But if you haven't taken one of these classes yet, please do. You'll learn a lot. You'll feel like you leveled up in your Marxism knowledge. So just search.
I'm doing something pretty new in this one. I'm including Western Marxist thinkers. Jameson and Zizek, who I think are probably the most important ones. And in these classes, you'll get the rational kernel and an analysis of the mystical shell. And if you consider Western Marxism to be an enemy, as I do, it's important to know our enemies and to give the devil his due when there's something due to give. And we'll do that in the last two classes of this seminar, which deals again with 20th century Marxist philosophy. So Lenin, Mao, Stalin, Gramsci, Althusser, Ilyenkov, Jameson, and Zizek. So sign up. It's going to be great. And I'm probably not going to teach something like this for many years. So do it while you can.
Sign up, folks. One more day. Jason, thank you for another $2. Cubans still live rent/mortgage free. Yeah, very good point. Life in Cuba is still much better in a lot of ways than it is here, and less stressful, which is seen in their culture, much more friendly, hospitable culture than what we have here in the U.S. And Ignacio, thank you much. Respect you guys. Thank you, Ignacio. Appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much for the financial support. We will keep grinding. We will keep doing everything we can, and we will bring about revolution here in the United States. acp.us/join if you want to be a part of that movement. MidwesternMarx.com if you want to check out what we're doing. Selfie. The Midwestern Marx Selfie, Midwestern Marx Publishing Press, if you want to get into any of our classes and help learn about the system that we're fighting. But other than that, thank you all so much for being here today. It was a ton of fun. Thank you to my co-host, Carlos Garrido. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, for you have nothing if you have no rights. Let racist ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. Freedom is merely privilege extended, unless enjoyed by one and all. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. Let no one build walls to divide us, walls of hatred nor walls of stone. Come greet the dawn and stand beside us. We'll live together or we'll die alone. In our world poisoned by exploitation, those who have taken, now they must give. And end the vanity of nations. We've but one earth on which to live. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The International ideal unites the human race. the law.